How nice to have so many faces in the room. Veteran faces, new faces, faces back for the second time, faces back that we haven't seen in a while. How wonderful. About 200 years ago, Hans Christian Andersen wrote a story that would be translated into about 100 languages. Raise your hand if you've heard the story of the Emperor's New Clothes. You can even raise your hand at home. No one will see it, which is an interesting pun with the story, because to refresh your memory, this emperor, who loves his fancy clothes, decided that he had to get even better with this treasury from the kingdom and hired the best swindlers, as it turned out, in the land to stitch him absolutely nothing, except everyone who saw it seemed to be complicit in this elaborate lie, deception. There was no yarn, there was no material on the loom. And the emperor paraded through the town, through the kingdom in his birthday suit, and one child screamed out, "The emperor has no clothes." How the story ends after that seems to be a matter of debate. But what I love about this is that that child is so clear about what the truth is in that moment. And this is something that growing up is a lesson that we learn. We learn that we are supposed to tell the truth. She hit me first. Did she really hit you first? The sculpture just fell off the table all by itself. Really? The house smells like cigarettes and beer all by itself. Some of these are child-parent conversations that happen over time, and there seems to be this way in which truth is questioned, truth is challenged, but yet somehow at the end of the day, the truth comes out. This week, we read Parshat Vayeshev. Joseph, Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph, our righteous person. At this point, the youngest son, his brother hasn't been born yet, brother Benjamin hasn't been born. Youngest son of Jacob is living in a fantasy world. He is living in a world in which his mother struggled with infertility, so his very birth was already a miracle. That's not a fantasy, I guess. That's a reality. But maybe the results of this got so elevated that the text makes so clear that Joseph is Jacob's favorite child. Jacob makes him a striped tunic that comes down to us in our Broadway tradition as the amazing Technicolor dream coat. And dream Joseph did. And this was part of this fantasy world into which Joseph was raised and reared. He described these incredible dreams, people bowing down to him. It seemed like his whole family was subservient to him, and somehow or another, he had no qualms about repeating these stories, what he had dreamt, to his brothers. This did not endear him to his brothers, nor did his father's favoring him, nor did his father basically making him a spy. Go out there into the fields, see how they're doing. I want to hear about what's happening with their flocks. You go, check on them, Joseph. This was not a great situation. And fantasy turned into stark reality one day when Joseph's brothers have had enough and seem to conspire to put an end to Joseph. They want to kill him. Reuven, the oldest brother, thinks, well, maybe we throw him in the pit. The brothers will calm down. I'll come back. I'll get him out of the pit. We'll get to a better place. But somehow in the middle of that, Yehuda, one of the older brothers, comes back, sees a band of Midianites, maybe Ishmaelites coming, and Joseph is taken out of the pit and sold to this group of people traveling through the land. The Midianites or Ishmaelites end up in ancient Egypt, where Joseph is trafficked into the home of a Mr. Potiphar. This was a person who was pretty high up in the rungs of Egyptian royalty, and Joseph himself, even from that low place in the pit, going down to Egypt, rose up in the ranks of Potiphar's servants, becoming the chief of all of the servants. But just when you thought a dreamy life would meet reality, that idea is no more, because Mrs. Potiphar had her eye on Joseph. Sounds like a lot of people know this story. And Mrs. Potiphar tries to seduce Joseph. Joseph resists, but Joseph is blamed. Maybe because Mr. and Mrs. Potiphar will not be embarrassed if the blame can be placed on Joseph. And now Joseph, who has done a lot of ups and downs between Canaan and the land of Egypt, is at the lowest of the low, this royal dungeon where he is left. One morning in the dungeon, two of Joseph's cellmates come to him looking distraught. And Joseph asks them why. The first of his cellmates is Pharaoh's butler. And the cellmates talk about dreams they had. There's no one to interpret them. And Joseph reassures them, God can do that. Evidently through Joseph. Joseph listens to the butler's dream. Okay, I have to tell you, my favorite midrash on this is a DreamWorks animation, circa 2000, direct to VHS, called Joseph, King of Dreams. It is the prequel to Prince of Egypt, so if you haven't seen it, just putting it out there. And we see this amazing scene in which Joseph has this connection with the butler and then the baker. The butler has dreamed of these three branches from a vineyard coming out, robust grapes ripening before their time, dripping this incredible grape juice wine into the Pharaoh's goblet. And Joseph knows right away that in 3 days, the butler will be restored to his rightful place in the palace. The baker, seemingly seeing a positive interpretation of a dream, says, "How about me? What's your dream?" "Well, I'm standing there and there are these 3 baskets of bread on my head. Pharaoh's beautiful bread baskets. And then these birds come along and start pecking at the basket on the top and eating away at the food." In the movie interpretation, Joseph's like, "Oh, no, yeah, we shouldn't talk about this." And eventually, the baker convinces Joseph to say what he understands the dream to mean. In 3 days, Pharaoh is going to decapitate you. Pharaoh is going to impale your body on a post, and the birds are going to eat your flesh. This isn't the first time most of you heard the story, right? I think in this moment, Joseph's phantasmical childhood of dreams, of not being connected to the real world, actually comes together with the real world that he's in. Because here, Joseph is confronted with dreams, but he does the hardest thing, particularly for the baker. He tells the truth. And in this case, he tells the truth when the truth is hard. He tells the truth when the truth actually means that this person has 72 hours to live. It's hard to imagine a truth-telling much more challenging than that, at least in the one-on-one. Sometimes I catch myself explaining that Judaism is a tradition of dreaming, that we are not a tradition of imagining the world as it is, but rather imagining the world as it could be. But the more I read this story, the more I believe I'm wrong. I want to add a word or two to that. Judaism is a tradition that doesn't just imagine the world that is, but also imagines the world as it could be. And that little word in there, the just thing, I think is important, very important. Because in order to imagine the world that can be, in order to imagine what is possible, we have to start with what is, right here and right now, in front of us. We have to name truth. We have to be the child in the story of the emperor's new clothes. 8 years, 9 years ago, these vocabulary words crept into American society like fake news and this sort of thing. And here we are with a society still victimized in many ways. Victimized by the idea that opinion gets confused for fact and that falsehood gets confused for opinion or fact. We have a really problematic world in lots of ways. And we have to change the world, and we can't desist from doing some of our part in changing the world. We're not going to change everything, but we have to change something. I think Rabbi Klein was fond of saying that a little more poetically than I just did. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, right? It is not your obligation to finish the work, but you can't desist from the work either, our sages say. Calling out the truth as we see it is the prerequisite for this. We don't always have to do it alone. Maybe the fact that Joseph is there with the butler, whose fate will be different, helps him say these really hard words to the baker. But Joseph in this parsha is an example to us that the truth has to come first. That we have to notice what is right in front of us. The end of our creation story says, Vayar Elohim et kol asher asa, v'hinei tov me'od. God saw what God created, and wow, it was so great. And thank God we live in a world with so many things that are so great. And we, created in God's image, have to be able to do just that, to look out and see what we see and name what we see. And sometimes, Baruch Hashem, it's going to be tov me'od. But sometimes it's going to be, insert favorite expletive or whatever, lo tov. Why don't we just say that? Okay? Ra, in fact, is the word in the Torah that's used to describe the countenances of the butler and the baker. So we need to see what's right in front of us. We need to sense, to hear what is right in front of us. Say what it is. Say the truth. Find other people to speak the truth with us. And then do the work together. Shabbat shalom.